Hey, this is Basketball Talk 77, and today's video is about our big misconception about free throw attempts in the NBA. Now, if you ask any big NBA fan what the biggest problem in the NBA is, a lot of them will say that it's free throws, that people take too many free throws. And at first, I agree with them. I thought that it is too bad, the amount of free throws that happen in a game. And it is very boring to watch them. The game is exciting and quick, and then suddenly, they blow a whistle, someone goes to the line, the exact same place every time, and the game slows down. There's no defense, there's no guarding, there's no excitement. It's just one guy consistently making free throws, shooting one shot, unguarded, and everything's still. It ruins the momentum of the game. And it happens a little bit too often as of late. I've seen so many game winners or final game moments that were decided by free throws, and that's just not exciting. And free throws in general are just not that exciting. But what if I were to tell you that we are actually not taking lots of free throw attempts today, nowadays, in the modern NBA? What if I were to tell you that today's modern NBA takes the least amount of free throw attempts of any time in the NBA? I came upon this information because I was looking at league averages because I think that's pretty interesting. It's a good representation of basketball history, the trends, how much people scored, and per 100 possessions. And I started looking, and I was like, I wonder about free throw attempts. There are a lot of free throw attempts these days. I wonder if it shows. And I looked, and it didn't exactly look like what I thought it would be. So I built a chart measuring the amount of free throw attempts per game every season. Here you can look. I have the free throw attempts on the y-axis and the decades and years, the seasons, on the x-axis. And you can see the rises and falls of the amount of free throw attempts for these different eras. It was high in the 50s and 60s, although very low in the very beginnings of the NBA in the 1940s. Then it went down in the 70s, and then came back up in the late 80s with the Bad Boys Pistons era, probably raising the amount of fouls and therefore the amount of free throw attempts for that era. And then, ever since then, there's been a steady decline in free throw attempts, where it's gone from 30 at its peak in the 80s to now closer to 20. However, there has no sudden uptick in free throw attempts as of the last 10 to 5 years. In fact, it has continued or perhaps even accelerated the decline in free throw attempts in the last 5 to 10 years. The last few years have seen some of the lowest free throw attempts per game of any season ever. This latest NBA season saw the second lowest free throw attempts in NBA history. The least amount of free throw attempts per game in NBA history was in 2017-18, only a few years ago. Today's athletes, today's NBA players, are shooting less free throw attempts than ever. And so this was really interesting to me. Once I plotted it, I did not expect this. I was wondering, what could be the answer? Where was this free throw misconception coming from? So I started looking at other stats. Number one, I looked at free throw attempts per 100 possessions. This is the first thing I look to because a lot of times per 100 possessions tells a better story of real NBA offense and defense than just per game, because different pace and different times of the league can wildly skew information. So I thought perhaps that's it. Maybe when I look at free throw attempts per 100 possessions every year, it will show that really we do shoot more these days. And so I looked. Now, unfortunately, we only show free throw attempts per 100 possessions after the 1973-74 season, because before that, attempts per 100 possessions and 100 possessions stats weren't kept track of. So we won't get to see anything like that. However, we can still see a few trends. Lower in the 70s, rises in the 80s to 30, just like we saw before. Then here, it kind of middles off and stays roughly the same throughout the next 30 years. And then it lowers again. By late 2000s, it starts a drop, a steadier drop than we saw at any other part of this chart. And then, as we saw before, it goes down. And the latest NBA season, 2020-2021 season, saw the lowest amount of free throw attempts per 100 possessions of the entire time where the stat was recorded. The lowest amount, clocking in at what looks to be 22 free throw attempts per 100 possessions, where there was 30 free throw attempts per 100 possessions 40 years ago. Now, this is really interesting to me at this point. I did not at all expect that not only in free throw attempts per game, but also per 100 possessions, that free throw attempts were the lowest that they'd ever been, essentially, in the modern NBA. So, I looked at one last thing that may cause this misconception about free throw attempts. Why were NBA fans saying that there were too many free throw attempts, that there was way more free throw attempts than usual, when in reality, there seemed to be less than ever? This chart shows free throw percentage for every year since the NBA was began like 70 years ago. Now, besides the first few years where free throw percentage was really low, after that, it's gone up by a lot, but then middled and stayed roughly the same. Now, there's greater fluctuations than in attempts per 100 possessions or per game, but there still is some general trends. It's lower in the 60s and lower in the 50s and 60s, and then rises in the 70s and 80s, goes down in the late 90s, and then goes up in the 2000s, and the 2010s and 20s is the highest ever, with the highest ever free throw percentage coming in this latest season, 2020-2021. So, is this the answer? Is this why there's a misconception about free throws? Is it because NBA fans don't like the high percentage that people are making free throws? Well, I highly doubt this. Now, what's important is that to look at the numbers on the side, because without looking at them, it can seem like there's great fluctuations and there might be real differences, but really, there actually isn't. If you take away the first few seasons of the NBA, when it was still the 1940s, not even the 1950s yet, so very long ago, once you get to 1950, it never lowers below 70% and never raises above 80%. For the next 70 years, it stays between 70 and 80%. From the lowest free throw percentage of these last 70 years to the highest, at most, you would need to watch 10 free throw attempts to see any difference. 10 free throw attempts. Now, that is noticeable, and for an experienced or even casual NBA fan watching enough games, you could notice a slight difference. But really, that's unlikely, because that's in the last 70 years. I'm sorry, but no NBA fans have been watching for the last 70 years, or very few of them. And so, most NBA fans have only been watching for the past 30 years, or 40 years, let's say. In that range, it's been only about a 0.5 or 5% difference in free throw percentage from the highest of 78%, or almost, 78% almost, to the lowest of 73%. That is a difference where you would have to watch 20 free throw attempts to see any difference in makes or misses. That is far too many free throw attempts to make a difference for any fan to notice anything. And especially not from a time like the 2000s, where free throw percentage was around 75%, to a time like the 2020s, where free throw percentage is around 77%. A difference far too small for people to be noticing major differences, or that's at least what they've been saying. So, it's not really enough difference for it to be free throw percentage. So if it's not free throw attempts per game, not free throw attempts per 100 possessions, and not free throw percentage, what could it be? I think it's something that we can't really keep track of, which is the quality of personal fouls. Now, there have been made a few charts and stats on this that are tried to make sense of it, like paint shots against free throw attempts graphs that can show one important thing, which is flopping. And I've seen a lot of videos being made lately about why flopping is a problem. And this may not surprise you, but I think that is the misconception. I think NBA fans don't have any problem with the number of free throw attempts we're taking. In fact, in a vacuum, NBA fans should be happy about it because there's less than ever. The real problem, though, is the amount, or rather the quality, of free throw attempts that people are taking. What kind of fouls are being called? And this brings us to foul baiting, which is a pretty bad concept, but a pretty common one. Now, there are some major culprits like Trae Young, but most players in the NBA, at least most successful offensive players in the NBA, have been doing lots of foul baiting lately. The stop and flop, which is perfected by Trae Young, grabbing players' arms and then throwing up a crazy shot, perfected by James Harden, and other measures have made the game impossible to watch. Watching grown men flail about like they've been run over by trains, when really, they haven't been fouled at all. It's not good basketball, and it's not entertainment. And that's the problem. NBA fans are fine with free throw attempts. They just want to actually feel like those free throw attempts were earned. So that is our misconception about NBA free throw attempts. It's not the quantity, it's the quality. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you can have more content like this. I will be posting a video on the Warriors or Wizards soon enough, and so if you're interested in that, then I will make a video on that and you can tune in. This is a pretty interesting one to me. It's not like my usual videos, but I just thought it was pretty interesting. And I realized it one day and I want to make a video on it. So I hope you like it. Anyway, like, subscribe, and see you next time.